A paycheck arrives and within days it's gone. Part to the mortgage or rent, more to groceries that cost 26% more than they did in 2019. A chunk for childcare, utilities quietly draining what's left, health insurance and unexpected bills closing the gap. Inflation is no longer making prices jump, but nothing goes back down. The same cart, the same tank of gas, the same roof over your head, all locked at a higher cost. As middle-class families juggle every dollar, how did it come to feel like surviving on a regular income is the real crisis, even when headlines claim relief? The answer begins when you see how 1 week's household bills never really shrink. Inflation and cost of living are often used as if they mean the same thing, but they measure two different realities. Inflation is the speed at which prices change, how much more expensive things get each year, usually shown as a percentage. The Consumer Price Index, known as the CPI, is the main tool for tracking this. It's a market basket of goods and services collected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, covering everything from groceries and gas to rent and medical care. When headlines mention inflation cooling off, they are talking about the yearly change in this index, how fast prices are rising now, not whether they fell back down. Cost of living, on the other hand, is about the level where prices have landed compared to your income and the bills you cannot skip. Once prices jump, even if inflation slows, those higher costs do not unwind. That is the core of today's pressure. Since December 2019, average consumer prices in the US are about 26% higher. The same cart of groceries, the same tank of gas, the same rent or mortgage now eats up a bigger slice of each paycheck, and that slice does not shrink just because inflation rates have cooled. This documentary uses US data because it is consistent and detailed. Every percentage point in the CPI reflects real changes in what families pay. The next step is to break down how these higher prices show up in a typical middle-class budget and which expenses do the most damage. Every household budget tells a story, and the numbers inside the Consumer Price Index reveal which chapters matter most. For middle-income families, shelter stands out as the single largest expense, making up about a third of the typical budget. That includes not just rent or mortgage payments, but also what economists call owner's equivalent rent, an estimate of what homeowners would pay to rent a similar home. This single category carries more weight in the CPI than groceries, gas, or even healthcare. When shelter costs rise, there is less room for everything else, forcing tough choices about where to cut back. The rest of the budget is divided among other essentials. Food at home claims about 8%, while eating out takes another 6%. Utilities like electricity and gas might seem small on paper, just 3 or 4% each, but their increases hit hard because they are impossible to avoid. Healthcare premiums and out-of-pocket costs hide in paychecks and medical bills, while childcare can easily rival a rent payment in many cities. Altogether, these categories, shelter, food, utilities, healthcare, and childcare, make up the lion's share of what middle-class families actually spend. When prices jump in any of them, there is little slack left. That is why, even with inflation slowing, the pain lingers. The biggest bills have already locked in their higher share of every paycheck. Home prices did not just inch upward, they leapt. Since late 2019, the Federal Housing Finance Agency Index shows a nearly 50% jump in the typical U.S. home price. For buyers in fast-growing cities like Phoenix, that means a house that sold for $300,000 before the pandemic now commands around $450,000. The Morales family, earning about $95,000 in Phoenix, faces a market where entry-level homes have moved out of reach in just a few years. That kind of increase is not a rounding error. It is a new barrier. First-time buyers now need tens of thousands more for a down payment, or they settle for less space, longer commutes, or older homes needing repairs. The sticker shock is not limited to Phoenix. Most major metros saw similar surges, with the West and Sunbelt leading the pack. Even in places where incomes have grown, the pace of home price appreciation has far outstripped what most families bring home. The result is a new reality. For many, the American dream of homeownership is slipping further away, not because of monthly payments yet, but because the asking price alone locks the door. Interest rates have rewritten the math for anyone hoping to buy a home. In early 2020, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate hovered near 3%. For a $300,000 loan, that meant a monthly payment of about $1,264 for principal and interest. By October 2023, rates spiked to 7.79%, pushing the same monthly payment to $2,157. That was a jump of nearly $900 every month, before taxes or insurance are even counted. Even after rates eased to around 6.09% in early 2026, that payment still lands at $1,816, hundreds more than just a few years ago. These numbers come straight from Freddie Mac's national averages. For middle-class buyers, the difference is not just a line on a chart, it is the gap between qualifying for a mortgage or walking away. Higher rates compound the pain of higher home prices, turning what used to be a manageable bill into a deal-breaker for many families. The result is more people are priced out or forced to stretch their budgets to the breaking point. Renters and homeowners alike face the same reality. Shelter is the budget's anchor, and it rarely gets lighter. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks shelter costs through two numbers, actual rent and something called Owner's Equivalent Rent, or OER. OER is the estimate of what homeowners would pay if they had to rent their own home, and it counts just as much in the Consumer Price Index as a tenant's monthly rent. Both have climbed about 3% over the past year, even after the wild swings of the pandemic have faded. For a middle-class renter in Philadelphia, that means last year's $1,900 apartment now costs nearly $2,000, and the landlord's notice is just the start. With utilities, insurance, and sometimes childcare stacked on top, the share of income going to shelter keeps creeping up. Homeowners may feel insulated, but OER means their rising costs, whether from taxes, repairs, or lost equity, still show up in the data. Shelter inflation is stubborn, and it keeps the pressure on every other line in the budget. Electricity bills have climbed by 6.3% over the past year, while utility gas has jumped nearly 10%. For a renter in Philadelphia, these increases show up as another $20 or $30 tacked onto an already tight budget, with no way to cut corners when the heat or lights are needed. Gasoline prices have actually dropped 7.5%, but that relief is often swallowed by higher utility costs at home. Groceries are up 2%, and eating out costs 4% more than last year. The gap between grocery store prices and restaurant bills means a family that once ordered takeout twice a week now has to think twice, trading convenience for savings as each dollar stretches less far. Health insurance premiums and childcare are two bills that often swallow a raise before it reaches the bank. For a three-person family in Des Moines earning about $125,000, the average employer health plan costs $26,993 a year, with the workers' share coming to roughly $6,850 according to the latest Kaiser survey. Add in national average childcare costs, now $13,128 a year, and a $3,000 annual raise can disappear almost entirely after taxes and these fixed expenses. For this family, even careful budgeting can't stretch paychecks far enough to rebuild savings. Each year, the basics take a bigger bite, leaving less room for emergencies or a future plan. The middle class in America now stretches from households earning about $61,000 up to $183,000 for a family of three. Within this band, the numbers tell a story of shrinking room for error. The personal saving rate has dropped to just 3.5%, meaning most families keep little in reserve after paying the bills. Total household debt stands at $18.8 trillion, with $1.3 trillion on credit cards alone, where average interest rates now top 21%. Student and auto loans each add another $1.7 trillion to the pile. Delinquency rates show the strain. Nearly 5% of debts are past due, while almost 10% of student loans have fallen behind since repayments restarted. Over the past 50 years, the share of national income held by the middle class has fallen from 62% to just 43%. For many, the old financial buffers, savings, equity, and a sense of stability have thinned to the breaking point. Today, the real test is not headline inflation. It is whether housing, childcare, healthcare, and utilities outpace middle-class paychecks. Watch shelter costs, real wages, saving rates, and debt signals. The scoreboard is public. Until these numbers move, the squeeze is real, and the story is not over. Share your take below.